There is one sentence that has quietly cost farmers millions over the last 20 years. It's easy in the Corn Belt. They have better soil, better rain, better everything. That sentence feels rational. It sounds grounded, it protects the ego, and it kills margin discipline. Because once you blame geography, you stop auditing management. Let's establish something clearly. Yes, states like Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana have strong soil profiles. Mollisols, deep organic matter, favorable rainfall patterns in many seasons. But soil quality does not explain a 2x-3x profit gap. If soil alone created dominance, then every acre inside those borders would perform equally. They don't. Within a single Iowa county, yield variability can exceed 60 bushels per acre between zones. Same county, same rain, same hybrid lineup. So what's the difference? Management intensity layered with technology. The Corn Belt advantage is not about perfect ground. It's about perfecting the ground you have. Let's talk numbers. In high-performance Corn Belt operations, corn yields frequently exceed 200 bushels per acre. In strong years, 220 plus is not rare. That part gets headlines. But here's the part nobody outside those regions wants to analyze. Net margin per acre often scales disproportionately compared to yield. A 20% yield advantage does not explain a 200% margin difference. Margins expand because input allocation is optimized. Margins expand because waste is compressed. Margins expand because decision error is reduced. Most operators outside elite adoption zones still apply uniform fertilizer rates across fields with highly variable productivity. That is not efficiency, that is comfort. Variable rate technology has been around for decades, yet adoption density remains uneven. In the Corn Belt, VRT penetration per acre is significantly higher than in many southern and western regions. Why? Because they treat data as infrastructure, not accessory. Let's break a dangerous habit. Many farms track yield aggressively but barely track input performance by zone. They know their top field did 195 bushels. They do not know that 40 acres inside that field consistently underperform because nitrogen is over-applied in low organic matter pockets. That gap compounds over time. Now layer this over scale. A 2,500-acre operation improving nitrogen efficiency by just 10% can shift 6 figures annually. 10%. That is not climate, that is calibration. Precision platforms from companies like John Deere and Trimble are deeply integrated across Corn Belt operations. Section control, auto guidance, yield mapping, variable rate prescriptions. But here's the key: hardware does not create profit. Feedback loops do. Corn Belt operators don't just collect data. They use multi-year stacking analysis. They compare 5-year yield maps. They overlay soil EC maps. They correlate rainfall distribution patterns. They adjust population density accordingly. That level of discipline creates incremental gains. And incremental gains compound. Now let's confront another uncomfortable reality. In many lower-performing regions, technology is purchased reactively. A neighbor buys auto steer, so you buy auto steer. A dealer promotes variable rate, so you trial it on 100 acres. But there is no integrated system, no audit process, no structured post-season review. The Corn Belt model is brutally analytical. Post-harvest meetings dissect field-level ROI. Input cost per bushel is reviewed. Population strategy is debated. Hybrid performance is ranked against stress tolerance zones. That culture matters more than rainfall. Because rainfall cannot be controlled. But response can. During moderate drought years, yield drops everywhere. Yet farms running precision nitrogen management and zone-based planting often see narrower yield volatility. Not zero loss, narrower loss. That stabilization protects margin. Margin protection funds reinvestment. Reinvestment funds the next layer of technology. That's the flywheel. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. If your margins are thinner, is it truly because your soil is inferior? Or is it because your management stack is incomplete? Blaming geography feels justified. Auditing systems feels threatening. One preserves pride, the other builds profit. The Corn Belt did not wake up elite. It became elite through iteration, through aggressive adoption, through peer pressure toward efficiency, through extension networks pushing trials, through financial institutions rewarding data-backed operators. That ecosystem accelerates improvement, but ecosystems can be built anywhere. What cannot be built is improvement without measurement. And measurement is the dividing line. If you are not running multi-layer analysis across your acres, you are competing blind against operators who are. And blind competition is expensive. The 3x profit advantage is not magic. It is margin discipline stacked over decades. It is eliminating input waste zone by zone. It is aligning seed population with water holding capacity. It is reducing overlap to near zero. It is auditing performance relentlessly. Climate influences yield, technology influences margin, and margin is what keeps farms alive during downturns. The biggest mistake outside the Corn Belt is not soil quality. It is assuming the advantage is unchangeable. Because once you believe that, you stop optimizing. And the moment optimization stops, compounding stops. Let's confront the second excuse that quietly sabotages profit outside the Corn Belt. Technology is too expensive for our margins. That statement sounds cautious, responsible, conservative. It's usually a capital allocation error disguised as prudence. Technology rarely destroys margins. Poor sequencing does. Here's the pattern. Many farms upgrade machinery before upgrading intelligence. They buy more horsepower before extracting performance from the acres they already have. They finance iron. They neglect insight. And iron without insight depreciates fast. Let's walk through how high-performing Corn Belt operators approach adoption differently. They do not jump from zero to full automation overnight. They stack systems in layers. Layer 1. Guidance and section control. This alone reduces overlap, especially in oddly shaped fields. That can reduce input waste by 3 to 7% depending on field geometry. Layer 2. Yield mapping with accurate calibration. Not just collecting data, calibrating it, cleaning it, storing it season after season. Layer 3. Variable rate seeding based on historical productivity zones. Not blanket population increases, zone-specific population targeting based on water holding capacity and yield stability. Layer 4. Variable rate nitrogen, informed by multi-year data and tissue sampling integration. Layer 5. Financial analytics that break down cost per bushel by field, not just by farm average. That's not technology shopping, that's architecture. And architecture compounds. Now compare that to what often happens outside core high adoption regions. A dealer promotes a new planter upgrade. You finance it, but you are still applying uniform nitrogen. Still seeding flat rate, still evaluating performance by whole field averages. That mismatch creates illusionary progress. You feel modern, your margins barely move. Let's talk numbers. Assume a 2,000-acre corn operation. Average nitrogen cost per acre, $150. If precision management reduces over-application by even 10%, that's $15 per acre saved. Across 2,000 acres, that's $30,000 annually. Now stack seed efficiency gains. If variable population eliminates overseeding in low productivity zones and saves $8 per acre, that's another $16,000. We're at $46,000 before yield improvements. That's conservative. Now layer yield stability improvements in stress years. If precision hybrid placement preserves just 5 bushels per acre during drought, at $5 per bushel, that's $25 per acre. Another $50,000. This is how margins double without doubling yield. The Corn Belt doesn't just produce more, it wastes less, and waste is invisible until you measure it. Look at adoption density of integrated systems from companies like John Deere, AGCO, and Trimble in Midwest states. The difference isn't ownership, it's utilization depth. Many farms own precision capabilities they barely use. Auto steer running, data logging off, variable rate capability available, flat rate prescriptions applied. That's like owning irrigation and choosing not to turn it on. Now let's address financing. Another common belief. They can afford it because their land values are higher. Higher land values do improve collateral position, but financing institutions increasingly reward operational transparency. Banks are more comfortable lending to operators who can present field-level cost breakdowns, multi-year yield stability data, and clear ROI projections. Precision documentation lowers perceived risk. Lower perceived risk improves financing terms. Better financing accelerates adoption. That is a structural advantage created by discipline, not rainfall. Capital confidence is built on numbers. Numbers are built on data. Data is built on systems. And systems are built intentionally. Outside the Corn Belt, many operations treat precision technology as optional enhancement. Inside the Corn Belt, it's baseline infrastructure. That mindset difference explains more than soil ever will. Now let's address another sequencing error. Scaling acreage before stabilizing margin per acre. Some operations expand aggressively to compensate for thin margins. But scale magnifies inefficiency. If you are leaking $20 per acre across 1,000 acres, that's painful. Leak $20 per acre across 5,000 acres, and you've institutionalized loss. Corn Belt operators often optimize before expanding. They tighten input use. They stabilize break-even thresholds. They build resilience. Then they scale. That's why margin per acre often improves before acreage increases. Let's make this uncomfortable. If your first reaction to technology is fear of cost, you may be focusing on expense instead of return velocity. The question isn't, can I afford it? The question is, what waste is currently funding inefficiency? Every field has underperforming zones. Every operation has overlap. Every farm has input misallocation somewhere. Precision doesn't create variability, it reveals it, and once revealed, it becomes optional whether you fix it. The Corn Belt fixed it faster. That speed created compounding advantage. In volatile commodity cycles, efficiency cushions price shocks. When corn prices compress, high-cost operators bleed first. Low-cost operators survive. Survival funds reinvestment. Reinvestment widens the gap. This is not about chasing gadgets. It's about strategic layering. Adopt guidance. Calibrate yield maps properly. Analyze 3 to 5 years of data before making major prescription shifts. Integrate soil sampling grids. Run replicated strips. Audit results. Repeat. Slow is smooth. Smooth compounds. And here's the harsh truth. Many regions outside the Corn Belt are not underperforming because of soil. They're underperforming because they skipped the discipline phase. They upgraded equipment without upgrading decision frameworks. They expanded acreage without tightening efficiency. They bought tools without building systems. Technology doesn't destroy profit. Unstructured adoption does. The Corn Belt's 3x margin story isn't about luck. It's about sequencing, discipline, and relentless elimination of waste. And now we move to the argument that usually ends conversations. Climate. Let's address the argument that usually ends the debate. Our weather isn't like theirs. Correct, it isn't. Rainfall patterns in Iowa are not the same as in Kansas. Heat stress profiles in Texas do not mirror those in Minnesota. Growing degree days vary. Moisture timing shifts. Evapotranspiration rates diverge. Climate matters. But here is the mistake. Climate is being treated as a verdict instead of a variable. A verdict ends strategy. A variable demands management. Let's break this down technically. Weather risk expresses itself in 3 primary ways for corn production. Water deficit during critical growth stages. Excess moisture reducing oxygen availability and root health. Heat stress during pollination. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Those stressors exist in the Corn Belt too. The difference is not absence of stress. It is preemptive adaptation. High-performing operations increasingly use predictive agronomic modeling based on historical field-level data. Not generic county averages. Field-level correlation studies. 5 to 10 years of yield maps layered with rainfall distribution, planting date, hybrid selection, soil organic matter levels, and nitrogen timing. When you stack that data, patterns emerge. Certain zones consistently underperform during low rainfall years. Other zones collapse under excessive moisture. Some hybrids demonstrate resilience under late-season heat spikes. Once identified, these patterns allow proactive adjustment. That is where margin protection begins. Let's talk water holding capacity. Soils with higher organic matter retain moisture longer. That is basic agronomy, but within the same field, organic matter can vary significantly. Flat-rate population planting assumes uniform water access. Zone-based population management adjusts density to moisture capacity. Lower population in drought-prone ridges. Higher population in moisture-stable valleys. This single adjustment can reduce yield volatility dramatically. Studies across Midwest production zones have shown that variable population strategies can stabilize yields by 5 to 10 bushels per acre in stress years compared to flat-rate planting. That difference isn't flashy, it's defensive, and defense preserves margin. Now let's discuss nitrogen timing. In high rainfall regions, leaching risk increases. In drier climates, volatilization risk rises under heat. Advanced operators use split applications, in-season sensing, and predictive modeling to reduce exposure. Not because they enjoy complexity. Because volatility punishes rigidity. Operators relying on a single pre-plant nitrogen pass carry higher weather exposure. Operators integrating adaptive timing reduce downside. It's not magic, it's risk compression. Now here is the key insight. Regions with harsher climates often become more conservative in technology adoption. Why? Because risk feels higher. Ironically, that increases vulnerability. If climate variability is higher, the need for data density is greater, not lower. In places like Nebraska and western Kansas, irrigation adds another layer of management complexity. Precision irrigation systems that integrate soil moisture sensors and evapotranspiration modeling dramatically improve water efficiency. But adoption depth varies. Where technology is fully integrated, yield stability improves significantly compared to operations using fixed irrigation schedules. Same water source, different management precision. Let's examine drought years specifically. During moderate drought cycles, yield reductions across the Midwest are inevitable. But farms with historical yield mapping and stress zone identification can pre-adjust hybrid selection and population strategy before the season begins. They do not eliminate drought impact. They narrow its spread. That narrowing matters. If average yield drops 20 bushels statewide, but your operation drops 12 instead of 20, your relative profitability improves. Relative performance drives long-term dominance. Now let's talk about heat stress during pollination. This is where many southern operators argue disadvantage. Higher nighttime temperatures reduce kernel set potential. True, but planting date optimization and hybrid maturity selection can shift pollination windows. Operators analyzing historical temperature trends adjust planting windows strategically to reduce peak stress exposure. That is planning, not luck. And here is where culture intersects climate. If your operation treats each season independently, you reset your learning annually. If you treat each season as data input into a long-term optimization model, you accelerate adaptation. The Corn Belt advantage is not stable weather. It is accelerated learning cycles. More trials, more replicated strips, more comparative hybrid data, more layered analytics. When climate hits, they already have playbooks. Now let's get even more direct. Blaming weather can become psychological insulation. It protects identity. It justifies stagnation. But climate volatility is increasing nationwide. Even historically stable zones are experiencing extreme swings. If weather becomes more unpredictable, rigid systems will suffer most. Flexible systems will survive. Flexibility is built on data, not optimism, not tradition. Data. If you cannot quantify how different zones of your farm respond under stress, you cannot strategically adapt. You are reacting. Reactive farming is expensive. Predictive farming is defensive. Defensive farming compounds margin. And this brings us to the biggest difference of all: culture. Because technology without cultural discipline is just expensive decoration. Technology does not create advantage by itself. Culture determines whether technology compounds or collects dust. You can install the most advanced precision stack from John Deere, integrate analytics platforms from Trimble, and finance top-tier equipment from a GCO. If your operational culture resists measurement, none of it scales. This is the uncomfortable dividing line. High-profit Corn Belt operations do not just run farms. They run performance systems. That sounds corporate. It is. And it works. Let's define culture in this context. Culture is how decisions are made when no one is watching. Culture is whether post-harvest analysis happens every year or only when prices collapse. Culture is whether yield variability is investigated or shrugged off as just that field. Culture is whether mistakes are documented or forgotten. Now look at the Midwest core. In states like Iowa and Illinois, peer density among high-performing operators is intense. Neighbors compare numbers. Extension meetings analyze trials. Seed dealers discuss replicated strip data openly. Banks request detailed projections. There is competitive pressure toward optimization. That pressure accelerates improvement. Outside high-density performance regions, many operations function in informational isolation. Less benchmarking, less peer comparison, less structured experimentation. That slows learning velocity. And velocity matters more than starting position. Here's a pattern that shows up repeatedly. Corn Belt operators frequently run side-by-side replicated trials inside commercial fields. Not demo plots, real acres. Hybrid A versus hybrid B across multiple soil zones. Variable rate prescription versus flat rate in control strips. Nitrogen timing comparisons under identical conditions. This produces internal data. Internal data is more trusted than university data. More trusted data drives faster change. Faster change compounds advantage. Now let's talk about post-season audits. Elite operators conduct brutal reviews. Field-level ROI breakdowns. Input cost per bushel. Margin by soil type. Equipment efficiency metrics. Downtime analysis. That sounds excessive. It's not. It's margin insurance. Average operators often review top-line yield and gross revenue. Elite operators review performance distribution. Where did we leak? Where did we over-apply? Where did we underperform relative to potential? They treat variance as opportunity, not annoyance. And here's the uncomfortable observation. Many lower margin regions protect tradition more than performance. Planting dates are inherited, population targets are inherited, nitrogen rates are inherited. That creates emotional attachment to strategy. Emotion slows adaptation, data speeds it. The Corn Belt advantage has less to do with soil texture and more to do with institutionalized curiosity. Why did this 40-acre zone drop 12 bushels? Why did this hybrid outperform under stress? Why did nitrogen response flatten after 180 pounds? These questions drive compounding improvement. Now layer generational transition into this. In many high-performing operations, younger operators push digital adoption while older operators contribute historical intuition. That blend is powerful. Experience plus analytics. When experience resists analytics, improvement stalls. Let's make this sharper. If your culture treats data as optional, you will always lag behind operators who treat it as mandatory. If your culture avoids uncomfortable metrics, you will avoid uncomfortable growth. Corn Belt dominance is not universal perfection. It is relentless iteration. More trials per acre, more conversations about ROI, more willingness to admit mistakes publicly. That accelerates collective learning, and collective learning creates regional advantage. Here's another factor rarely discussed. Professionalization. Top-tier operations increasingly operate with structured advisory networks. Agronomists, financial consultants, data analysts, not because they lack skill, because specialization improves decision quality. Outside those zones, farms often rely heavily on internal judgment alone. Internal judgment is valuable, but without external challenge, blind spots persist. And blind spots cost money. Now let's examine risk psychology. In many lower-performing regions, climate volatility creates defensive mindsets. Defensive mindsets reduce experimentation. Reduced experimentation slows learning. Slow learning preserves mediocrity. In contrast, many Corn Belt operators hedge risk through diversification of strategy. They test before scaling. They allocate a percentage of acreage to experimentation annually. That is controlled risk. Controlled risk produces insight. Insight produces leverage. Leverage produces margin expansion. And here's the final cultural difference. Accountability. High-profit operators know their break-even cost per field. Not per farm, per field. Some know it per management zone. If corn drops $1 per bushel tomorrow, they already know which acres remain profitable and which need adjustment next season. That clarity changes behavior. When you know your numbers, decisions become proactive. When you don't, decisions become emotional. Emotion is expensive in agriculture. Let's bring this back to the thesis. The 3x profit gap is not soil magic. It's systems plus culture. Systems create data. Culture enforces use of data. Without culture, systems decay. Without systems, culture lacks feedback. Together, they compound. If your region underperforms, the first audit should not be rainfall charts. It should be cultural discipline. Do you run structured trials? Do you conduct annual performance audits? Do you benchmark aggressively? Do you document mistakes? Do you challenge inherited practices? If the answer is no, climate is not your primary constraint. Culture is. And here's the part that stings. Culture can be changed anywhere. Soil cannot. That means the biggest barrier to closing the profit gap is not geography. It's willingness. Let's restate the thesis clearly. The Corn Belt does not generate 3x more profit because it is blessed. It generates more profit because it compounds advantage systematically. So the real question isn't whether your soil matches Iowa. The question is whether your management intensity matches it. Because climate influences yield, systems influence margin, and margin determines survival. Now we move from theory to execution. If you want to close the gap, you need a structured transformation plan. Not hype, not equipment envy, a sequence. Step 1. Establish measurement discipline. If you do not have at least 3 years of calibrated yield data layered with soil sampling, you are operating partially blind. No negotiation here. Multi-year stacking analysis reveals patterns that single seasons hide. Export your data. Overlay yield maps with organic matter zones. Identify stability versus volatility zones. Your first objective is not higher yield. It is visibility. Because what you cannot see, you cannot optimize. Step 2. Identify margin leakage. Break down cost per acre by input category. Nitrogen, seed, crop protection, fuel, labor. Now push deeper. Where are you applying flat rates across variable soils? Where does yield response flatten despite increasing input? If nitrogen response plateaus at 170 pounds in certain zones, why are you applying 200? Waste is your funding source for improvement. Eliminate waste before expanding acreage. Scaling inefficiency scales loss. Step 3. Zone-based strategy. Stop treating fields as single units. Every field contains microeconomies. Low organic matter ridges, high moisture depressions, compaction zones. Adjust population density accordingly. Lower population in stress-prone zones reduces downside exposure. Higher population in stable zones maximizes upside capture. This is not theory. Operators across Illinois and Indiana have demonstrated consistent stabilization of yield variability using zone-based planting. Stability compounds profit. Step 4. Institutionalize trials. If you are not running replicated strips every year, you are outsourcing your future to guesswork. Test hybrids. Test nitrogen timing. Test variable rate prescriptions versus flat rate controls. Document results. If your region has more volatility, you need more experimentation, not less. Controlled experimentation reduces uncertainty. Uncertainty is expensive. Step 5. Financial transparency. Know your break-even per field, not per farm, per field. If corn drops $1 tomorrow, which acres remain profitable? If you cannot answer that immediately, your risk exposure is higher than you think. Banks increasingly reward operators who demonstrate analytical clarity. Capital flows toward discipline. Better financing lowers cost of growth. That accelerates the advantage cycle. Now let's address the psychological shift required. Blaming geography preserves comfort. Building systems creates discomfort. Systems expose inefficiency. They challenge long-held assumptions. They sometimes prove that inherited practices are suboptimal. That's uncomfortable, but comfort does not scale margin. Iteration does. The Corn Belt's dominance emerged from decades of iterative discipline. Layered adoption of technology from companies like John Deere and Trimble. Aggressive data integration, peer benchmarking, post-season audits, cultural expectation of improvement. None of that is geographically restricted. What is restricted is willingness to implement. Here's the strategic reframing. Instead of asking, why can't we compete with the Corn Belt? Ask, where are we under-optimizing relative to our potential? Because potential is not fixed. It is elastic within management boundaries. Elasticity expands with data density. Data density expands with discipline. Discipline expands with intent, and intent is a decision. Let's also make this clear. The goal is not to mimic Iowa blindly. Your climate is different, your stress patterns are different, your hybrid response curves are different, but your capacity for systems thinking is identical. The 3x profit gap narrows when input waste declines, yield volatility compresses, capital allocation becomes strategic, cultural audits replace emotional defense. If you adopt that framework, your region becomes less relevant. Execution becomes dominant. The future of agricultural profitability will not be determined by rainfall maps alone. It will be determined by integration. Operators who integrate data, technology, finance, and culture into a cohesive system will outperform. Operators who rely on tradition and geography will plateau. You can inherit land, you cannot inherit leverage. Leverage is built, acre by acre, season by season, decision by decision. Stop blaming your region, start engineering your edge, because the real competitive advantage is not located in the Corn Belt. It is located inside disciplined management, and disciplined management scales anywhere.